4:12 a.m. Pickens County, Alabama. July 2nd, 2026. 16 federal agents moved through the dark in 2 columns. No sirens. No lights. The property ahead was 40 acres of overgrown pasture and a rusted feed supply lot that had not done business in 11 years. A metal outbuilding sat 60 yards behind a farmhouse with the shades always drawn. The columns separated at the tree line, one toward the outbuilding, one toward the front door. They had 28 days of surveillance on this property. They had subpoenas, affidavits, burner phone records, and a propane bill that made no sense at all. They had the names of 14 people who had not been home since spring. They had 1 minute to breach. What broke this case open was not a wiretap, not a confidential informant, not a federal tip line. It was a woman named Dana Pruitt, a veterinary technician from Gordo, Alabama, who drove home the long way on a Tuesday evening in early May 2026. She turned off State Route 89 onto a county blacktop she sometimes used to avoid the stoplight construction near town. She was not in a hurry. She was thinking about a border collie she had treated that afternoon. She noticed the flip-flop because it was pink. The ditch line along that stretch was the color of rust and mud, and the pink stood out. She almost kept driving. Then she stopped. It was a woman's sandal. Alone. Face down in the gravel, beside a chain-link gate that was always padlocked. She had driven past that gate a dozen times and never seen it open. She had never seen a car in the lot. She had never seen a person on the property. She took a photograph. She drove home. She called the Pickens County Sheriff's Office the following morning. What happened in the 28 days between that phone call and the breach at 4:12 a.m. is how federal investigations actually work. Not fast. Not loud. Not the way television shows it. Slow, methodical, step by step. One record at a time. One pattern at a time until the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. The deputy who took Dana Pruitt's call was a 12-year veteran named Marcus Webb. He ran the parcel. 41 acres registered to a man in his mid-70s, a widower, listed as the property's sole resident. The man had no current warrants. He had one thing on his record that caught Webb's attention: an assault charge from 16 years earlier, pleaded down, no conviction. Webb drove past the property that afternoon. The gate was chained. The shades were down. A for sale sign stood at the road, weathered and sun-bleached, listing no agent, no phone number. Webb wrote it up. He sent a copy to the county sheriff's detective unit and, because something about the for sale sign bothered him, it looked like it had been there for years and been placed there deliberately, as furniture rather than function, he forwarded the write-up to the FBI's Birmingham field office with a note that read, "Might be nothing. Thought you should see it." Special Agent Claire Dennison received the forward 3 days later. She almost filed it without action. The field office was managing 4 active wire cases and 2 ongoing grand jury matters. A parcel in Pickens County with a single found shoe did not rank highly. Then she ran the owner's name through the Bureau's National Crime Information Center and cross-referenced it against the FinCEN database used to track large cash retail purchases. What came back stopped her. Over the previous 14 months, a man matching the property owner's profile had made repeated grocery purchases, bulk rice, canned protein, cooking oil, bottled water, at stores in 3 separate counties, none of them Pickens. The purchases were in cash. The closest store was 41 miles from the property. The farthest was in Lamar County, near the Mississippi state line. The quantities were not remarkable for a single purchase. The pattern across 14 months was: a person living alone on a rural property does not buy enough rice and canned goods every 3 weeks to feed 8 to 12 people. Dennison opened a preliminary inquiry. She requested the propane account for the property. The propane records arrived 11 days after the initial tip. The delivery logs showed usage consistent with a 2,000 square foot structure operating continuously at high occupancy. Not a widower living alone. Winter-level propane consumption in May and June, when Alabama temperatures were already pushing past 90 degrees Fahrenheit. That meant cooking. That meant hot water. That meant people. The detail that unlocked everything was not dramatic. It was a utility bill. A propane account that cost $43 more per month than it should have. Federal cases are broken on exactly this kind of gap, the number that does not match the life it is supposed to represent. Dennison put the inquiry on a formal track. She assigned a bureau analyst, a woman named Farida Osei, to pull missing persons reports across a 3-state corridor: Alabama, Mississippi, and the Florida Panhandle. The parameters were narrow. Adult women, ages 20 to 30, reported missing between January and June 2026. Cases still open. No confirmed leads. Osei pulled 47 reports in the first pass. She narrowed by geography, excluding women with documented histories of voluntary disappearance or substance involvement. That left 22. She narrowed by timeline, looking for disappearances that clustered around the date range suggested by the grocery purchase pattern. That left 16. Then she started looking at phones. A subpoena on cellular tower records near the property produced ping data for a prepaid burner device that had been active in Pickens County since late February 2026. The device had connected to towers near the property at regular intervals, not the pattern of someone passing through, but the pattern of a device that lived there. Osei ran the device's call history through the FBI's link analysis platform. The burner number appeared in the contact logs of 3 separate missing women cases. One call placed 11 days before a young woman named in a Meridian, Mississippi report had last been seen. One call placed 6 days before a second report out of Dothan, Alabama. One call placed to a number belonging to a friend of a third woman reported missing from Mobile in early April 2026. 3 cases. 1 phone. 1 property. Dennison called Osei at 7:45 on a Thursday morning. She said 4 words: "Build me the affidavit." The obstacle they hit was immediate. 3 missing women cases, a propane bill, and a burner phone with indirect connections did not constitute probable cause for a warrant to enter the property. A federal magistrate would need more. Dennison knew what more looked like. It looked like months of additional work, during which 14 people, the number they now suspected, based on the grocery volumes, were still inside that farmhouse and that outbuilding. She called the U.S. Attorney's Office in Birmingham. The lead prosecutor had 20 years of trafficking-adjacent case experience. He told her she had 2 options: build the case the right way and risk the time it takes, or attempt a welfare check through county channels and possibly spook the subject into moving the victims. There was no good option. Federal investigators working a case like this are not choosing between a fast answer and a slow one. They are choosing between types of risk. Dennison chose the case. She went back to Osei and told her to dig deeper. What Osei found in the next 72 hours changed the trajectory of the investigation. She had been running the missing women reports against each other looking for geographic overlap. Instead, she found something else: victim profile overlap. All 3 women whose cases connected to the burner phone shared a specific characteristic. Each had been employed in a service industry or healthcare-adjacent role. A hospice aide from Meridian. A diner cook from Dothan. A woman from Mobile who had been planning a wedding. Her fiancé had been holding a deposit on a venue since January, and in April he had called the venue to ask if the deposit could be extended because his fiancé had not come home. Put yourself in that fiancé's position for a moment. April in Mobile, Alabama. Holding a deposit on a wedding venue. Calling the venue coordinator to explain that your bride-to-be is missing and you are not ready to give up. That detail, the venue deposit, the phone call from the fiancé, was in the Mobile Police Department's supplemental case notes. It had not been flagged. Osei flagged it. The profile emerging was of women between 22 and 27, employed, without extensive social networks that would generate immediate institutional alarm at their disappearance. Not invisible, each had been reported missing. But the reports had not been connected to each other because the women had gone missing across 3 jurisdictions, and the connecting thread, the burner phone and the grocery pattern, had not been visible to any single local agency. This is how trafficking operations survive. They exploit the gaps between jurisdictions. They are not invisible. They are just barely wider than the field of vision of any single law enforcement agency looking at any single report. Before Dennison's team could move toward a warrant application, they needed to understand the 3 anchor cases in detail. Osei prepared summary profiles on each of the women whose disappearances connected directly to the burner phone call log. Those profiles are part of the affidavit record. Reading them in sequence produces a specific effect. Not grief exactly, but the recognition of ordinary life interrupted so completely that it leaves a clean edge. The hospice aide from Meridian was 24 years old. She had worked for a home health agency for 2 years. She was described by her supervisor as meticulous and patient, the kind of worker who called families back when she did not have to. She had a younger brother in Jackson who had texted her the evening of her last confirmed contact and received a reply. The reply was normal. She was going to stop for groceries on her way home. She never arrived at her apartment. The groceries were never purchased. Her car was found 3 days later in a gas station lot off Interstate 20, keys in the cup holder, phone missing, a partial cup of convenience store coffee on the passenger floorboard, still in its sleeve. The diner cook from Dothan was 26. She had been saving to move to Pensacola. She kept a note card taped to her refrigerator listing the steps she planned to take before the end of the year: save $1,200 more, submit rental applications, give 2 weeks' notice. Her roommate found the note card when she filed the missing persons report. She told the Dothan detective it was the saddest thing she had ever read, because every item on the list was achievable. It was the plan of someone certain about her future. The detective included the detail in his report. It went nowhere because it had nowhere to go. Osei found it 4 months later in a secondary field of a supplemental notes document that had not been indexed in the regional system. The young woman from Mobile, the one with the venue deposit, had been a certified nursing assistant. She and her fiancé had been together since college. She was 25. He was 27. They had met at a study group for a biology exam neither of them had done well on. He had told that story at their engagement party the previous October, in a backyard in Midtown Mobile with paper lanterns strung between the oak trees. These are the details that federal investigators hold in their heads for the months it takes to build a case like this, because holding them is the only honest way to understand what the work is actually for. A propane bill, a burner phone, a link analysis report. None of it is the point. The point is the note card on the refrigerator, the grocery stop that never happened, the study group for a biology exam. Farida Osei had been a bureau analyst for 7 years. She had worked 7 prior missing persons adjacent matters. She later told a colleague that building the victim profiles for this case was the hour of work in her career that she would carry the longest. She did not elaborate. She did not have to. On May 22, 2026, Dennison's team installed a pole-mounted camera on the power line easement adjacent to the property's mailbox. The installation was conducted between 2:40 and 3:15 a.m. by 2 agents in unmarked vehicles. No one inside the property appeared to notice. The camera unit was compact, weatherproof, matte black, designed to blend with the utility infrastructure that already lined that stretch of county road. It was positioned at an angle that gave a clear sightline to both the farmhouse front and the outbuilding's primary door, with a partial view of the gravel lane that connected the 2 structures. The camera fed a live stream to the Birmingham field office. Agents reviewed the footage in 4-hour shifts. For 9 days, The footage showed almost nothing. A truck parked near the farmhouse that did not move. An older man who left the property twice, once to a hardware store in Fayette, once to a gas station in Reform. No other visible activity. No visible women. No movement near the outbuilding. On both occasions when the subject left the property, a bureau vehicle followed at distance. The Fayette trip lasted 41 minutes. He purchased a length of galvanized chain, 2 combination padlocks, and a box of half-inch bolts at the hardware store. He paid cash. The purchase was photographed by an agent in plain clothes who happened to be standing in the fastener aisle. The receipt was later recovered during the post-raid evidence collection and matched the hardware still installed on the outbuilding's interior partition door. The galvanized chain he purchased in Fayette was the chain that held the padlock on the interior pantry frame door. That receipt, $11.62, paid in cash at a hardware store in a small Alabama town, became Exhibit 47 in the federal case file. Then, on day 10 of the camera feed, at 6:17 a.m., a side door of the metal outbuilding opened. A woman stepped out. She was young, estimated mid-20s. She stood in the light for less than 30 seconds, then stepped back inside. The door closed. Dennison reviewed the clip 4 times. The woman had not been moving freely. The way she moved, the way she stood in the doorway and looked, not at the fields or the sky, but at the ground, at her feet, was consistent with someone exercising a very narrow, supervised freedom. A person allowed outside for 30 seconds is not free. On day 14 of the camera feed, the side door opened again. A different woman. Same posture. Same brief duration. Same quality of stillness, the specific kind of stillness that belongs to someone who has learned not to make sudden movements or look too far in any direction. She was back inside before 40 seconds had elapsed. These 2 clips, 62 seconds of footage, combined across 14 days of surveillance, went into the affidavit. What the formal language did not convey, and what Dennison flagged in her internal case notes, was that the 2 women appeared to have been granted access to the outside one at a time, on different days, in a pattern that suggested deliberate management of outdoor exposure. Scheduled, at a level of control that implied someone inside that building was making decisions about who went out and when. Combined with the propane records, the burner phone link analysis, and the grocery purchase pattern, the footage was enough. What is striking about this case is not the scale of what was happening behind those drawn shades. It is how narrow the margin was. Without Dana Pruitt driving home the long way, without Marcus Webb forwarding a write-up he himself described as might be nothing, without Farida Osei running a correlation that no single missing persons database had been designed to produce, this case does not get built. These 14 people do not get found. 1 flip-flop in a ditch. 1 forwarded email. 1 analyst who ran 1 more search. Federal Magistrate James Harlow in Birmingham signed the search warrant on June 28, 2026, at 2:17 in the afternoon. The warrant authorized entry to the farmhouse and the outbuilding on the Pickens County property, search of all structures and vehicles, and seizure of electronic devices, communications equipment, and any evidence related to unlawful detention and transportation of persons. Dennison had 24 hours to plan the breach. The raid plan called for simultaneous breach of both structures. The farmhouse and the outbuilding were 60 yards apart. If the subject inside the farmhouse heard the team hitting the outbuilding first, he had 60 yards and approximately 12 seconds before the second team reached him. 12 seconds is enough time to destroy evidence. It is enough time to make decisions that could endanger the women inside. Simultaneous breach required 2 teams, 2 points of entry, and precisely synchronized timing. The FBI SWAT element from the Birmingham field office provided 8 agents. Additional bureau personnel and Pickens County Sheriff's deputies established a perimeter. Medical teams, 2 ambulances, and a county EMS supervisor staged on the county road 200 yards from the gate. The breach plan was walked through twice in the 24 hours before execution. The first walkthrough used satellite imagery and the surveillance camera feed to map every approach angle, every potential line of sight, from the farmhouse windows to the outbuilding path, every point at which a person inside either structure might hear or see movement before entry was achieved. The second walkthrough was physical. Agents staged on a county road 3 miles from the property and ran the timing sequence against a stopwatch. The window between the first team making noise at the outbuilding and the second team reaching the farmhouse front door could not exceed 6 seconds. They ran it 4 times. The best run was 4 seconds. They planned for 6 and hoped for 4. The operation had one obstacle that did not appear in the planning documents. At 3:40 a.m., 45 minutes before the scheduled breach, one of the surveillance agents on perimeter reported that a light had come on in the outbuilding. A single light, visible through a crack in the metal siding. Someone inside was awake. Dennison made the call. They moved the breach up to 4:12 a.m., 43 minutes ahead of schedule. The teams were already staged. The medical units were already in position. The only thing that changed was the clock. Moving a federal SWAT breach forward by 43 minutes because someone turned on a light inside a building sounds like an overreaction. In practice, a light in a structure holding captive individuals at 3:40 a.m. can mean a dozen things, and none of them are routine. Dennison had spent 28 days building this case. She was not going to let 43 minutes be the variable that broke it. 4:12 a.m. Both teams moved simultaneously. The outbuilding team hit the side door with a ram at 4:12 and 11 seconds. The farmhouse team made entry through the front door at 4:12 and 14 seconds. 3 seconds of separation. Close enough. The outbuilding was a single open structure, metal walls, concrete floor, with an interior partition that ran 2/3 of the way across. On the far side of the partition was a door. The door was padlocked from the outside. Behind the padlock was a second door, a false wall fitted with a pantry-style frame, hinged to open inward. The SWAT team leader cut the padlock with bolt cutters. He opened the pantry door. Inside, behind the false wall, in a room approximately 18 feet by 22 feet, agents found 14 young adults. All American, all consistent with prolonged confinement. They ranged in age from 22 to 27. They had been reported missing between late February and early June 2026. The hospice aide from Meridian was there. The diner cook from Dothan was there. The young woman from Mobile, the one whose fiancé had been holding a wedding venue deposit since January, was there. Medics moved them out in blankets, one by one through the outbuilding side door, into the pre-dawn air of a Pickens County morning that was already warm at 4:15 a.m. The subject, a man in his mid-70s, was taken into custody in the rear bedroom of the farmhouse. No resistance. No shots fired. He was handcuffed and walked to a waiting federal vehicle while the medical teams were still working in the outbuilding. He said nothing. In the hour that followed the breach, evidence collection agents moved through both structures with cameras and collection bags, working in a systematic grid pattern from the perimeter of each room inward. The farmhouse yielded the 3 prepaid phones and the desktop computer almost immediately. They were in a back room that appeared to serve as the subject's primary living space, alongside a cot, a portable television, and a metal storage cabinet secured with a combination lock. The cabinet, opened by an FBI forensic locksmith at 5:23 a.m., contained transaction records, paper, handwritten columns in a lined composition notebook, dates, initials, and dollar figures. The notebook's entries ran back 16 months. The forensic accountant assigned to the case would later testify that the notebook was among the most straightforward financial records she had encountered in 11 years of forensic accounting work. The entries were meticulous. They were also, in their clinical precision, initials instead of names, dollar amounts without context, dates that corresponded to the burner phone's call log with remarkable consistency, among the most disturbing documents she had reviewed. The combination of ordinary bookkeeping habit and extraordinary subject matter is a specific category of evidence that federal investigators encounter in cases of sustained, organized criminal activity. The banality of the record-keeping is part of how the operation ran for as long as it did. It looked, to anyone who might have glimpsed it without context, like a farm ledger. The outbuilding yielded the padlocked hardware, the galvanized chain from the Fayette hardware store, the 2 combination locks, the half-inch bolts anchoring the false wall's hinge plate to the concrete floor. It also yielded personal items belonging to the adults inside. Shoes, clothing, a phone, cracked screen, no battery, a notebook, different from the subjects, this one with handwriting that a later analysis matched to 2 of the victims. The entries in that notebook were not transaction records. They were dates and, beside the dates, single words or short phrases. The nature of those entries remained under seal as of the time of the public filing. A supervising agent who reviewed the notebook in the field described it in her own case notes as a record of time. Someone had been keeping track of the days. A federal grand jury in the Northern District of Alabama returned a sealed indictment 8 days after the raid. The charges, according to the publicly filed docket, included conspiracy to commit forced labor, transportation of persons across state lines for unlawful purposes, and obstruction of justice. Additional counts related to the false structure, the pantry wall, the padlocked interior room, were added in a superseding indictment filed the following week. The indictment noted that the investigation had identified contact between the subject's burner device and individuals in 2 additional states, Mississippi and Georgia. Those contacts were under separate review. A man in his mid-70s, operating on a 41-acre property in rural Alabama, held 14 adults in a hidden room for periods ranging from weeks to months, and for the first quarter of that period, not a single institutional system connected the dots. Not the missing persons databases. Not the county sheriff's routine property checks. Not the utility providers. Not the grocery stores where he bought bulk supplies every 3 weeks in cash. The system did not fail catastrophically. It failed quietly, in the ordinary way that institutional systems fail when they are not designed to share information across jurisdictions. The Meridian Police Department had 1 report. The Dothan Police Department had 1 report. The Mobile Police Department had 1 report. None of those agencies had the others. A federal analyst named Farida Osei connected them in 72 hours once she had access to all 3 simultaneously. That gap between what individual agencies can see and what a coordinated federal review can see is not unique to this case. It is structural. This case shows how these operations persist. The 28 days it took to build this case was not slow. By the standard of comparable federal investigations, it was fast. The system worked, but only once a county deputy thought to forward a note to a Birmingham field office, and only once an FBI agent chose to open an inquiry on a case that could very easily have been filed and forgotten. The margin was this small. In the days following the raid, the Birmingham field office conducted a forensic review of the outbuilding and the farmhouse. Electronic devices recovered from the property, 3 prepaid phones, 2 tablets, and a desktop computer, were imaged and sent to the FBI's Digital Forensics Unit. Analysts identified communication records extending back 14 months. The records showed contact with at least 2 individuals in other states whose identities remained under investigation at the time the indictment was filed. One of those contacts had made a single call to the property's burner number in early March 2026. The call lasted 6 minutes. The originating device was traced to a tower in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. The device had not been active since April. The individual associated with that device had not been identified and located as of the filing date. That is an open case. It remains open. The camera record from the pole-mounted surveillance unit was preserved as evidence. Reviewed in sequence, the 9 days of almost nothing footage, and then the 30-second clip of a young woman standing in a doorway at 6:17 a.m. tells a specific story about what careful attention to a small detail can produce. Dana Pruitt, the veterinary technician from Gordo, was not called as a witness in the grand jury proceeding. Her role in the case was documented in the investigative file, the tip, the photograph, the date of the call to the sheriff's office, but she was not a party to the federal action. She gave a brief statement to a local reporter from the Tuscaloosa Thread in early July 2026. She said she almost did not stop. She said the collie she had treated that afternoon was the reason she was driving that road in the first place, and she did not know why that felt important to mention, but it did. It should feel important. That is how this case started. Not with federal resources, not with a wiretap or a confidential informant or a 6-month undercover operation. With a pink flip-flop in a ditch line and a woman who stopped to take a photograph. One detail in the case file, in Farida Osei's link analysis report, filed as an exhibit in the affidavit, she noted that the burner phone's contact pattern showed activity spikes on Sundays. Early morning. Between 5 a.m. and 7 a.m. She flagged it, but did not draw a conclusion. The subsequent forensic review of the recovered devices suggested the Sunday pattern corresponded with an incoming coordination call from the Hattiesburg number. The Hattiesburg contact appears to have been a logistics point. The nature of that coordination, and who else was involved in it, is part of the open investigation. The court transcripts on this case run to several hundred pages. A single footnote in the digital forensics exhibit tells a story the indictment itself does not fully account for. The property in Pickens County was not the only property referenced in the recovered communications. A second location, described in a text exchange between the subject's device and the Hattiesburg number, was referenced by a geographic descriptor that forensic analysts were unable to match to a specific address as of the filing date. Investigators believed the second location was in Mississippi. They could not confirm it. That uncertainty, a second property, possibly still active, address unknown, was the reason the indictment's unsealing was coordinated with parallel outreach to the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation and the FBI's Jackson Field office. As of the public filing date, that coordination was ongoing. No second location had been confirmed or searched. One thread pulled until everything unravels. Except not everything has unraveled. The thread is still moving. The 14 people recovered from the Pickens County property were transported to medical facilities in the Birmingham metropolitan area. All received immediate evaluation and treatment. The case file documents that each was consistent with the effects of prolonged confinement. Federal documentation of this kind never describes what happened to these people. The horror lives in what is not written, in the gap between the clean institutional language and the 30 seconds of footage showing a young woman standing in a doorway looking at her feet. 3 of the 14 had been missing long enough that family members had begun reaching out to victim advocacy organizations for guidance on long-term search campaigns. One family in Mobile had scheduled a press conference for July 10, 2026, 8 days after the raid, to appeal publicly for information. That press conference was canceled. The young woman from Mobile, the bride-to-be, the woman whose fiancé had been extending a wedding venue deposit since January, was among those recovered. She had been missing for approximately 3 months. Her fiancé received a phone call at 5:47 a.m. on July 2, 2026, approximately 90 minutes after the breach. The call came from a number he did not recognize. It was a victim advocate from the FBI's Birmingham office. He answered because it was before 6 in the morning and he had not been sleeping well since April. He did not say anything for a long time after the advocate spoke. Then he said, "Is she okay?" The advocate told him she was receiving care. He said, "Can I come?" That moment, that specific question, in that specific pre-dawn hour, is not in any federal document. It is in a local news account published 4 days after the raid. It is included here because it is what this case was actually about. Not the propane records. Not the burner phone link analysis. Not the SWAT breach or the sealed indictment. 14 people. People waiting for them. A phone call at 5:47 a.m. On July 7, 2026, the Tuscaloosa Thread published the first news account of the case. It identified the general facts of the arrest, the property location in Aliceville, the federal charges, and the recovery of multiple adults. It did not name the subject. Federal procedure in an ongoing prosecution does not permit the identification of unnamed co-conspirators, and the investigation into the Hattiesburg contact and the possible second property made the full case record subject to continued sealing. The Thread reporter, working from court filings and a brief statement from the U.S. Attorney's Office, described the case as arising from a tip to the Pickens County Sheriff's Office. Dana Pruitt was not named in that account. She was described as a local resident. She had, by that point, already gone back to work. She treated a Labrador Retriever for a hip problem on July 3rd. She treated a quarter horse for a respiratory infection on July 5th. The flip-flop she photographed in the ditch line was logged as evidence and retained in the federal case file. The open question in this investigation is not whether the man in custody will be convicted. The affidavit is airtight, the forensic record is extensive, and the testimony of 14 witnesses is available to federal prosecutors. The open question is what was on the other end of that Sunday morning call, and whether it connects to something larger than a single property in Pickens County, Alabama. The case is not closed. It is in federal court. The driveway at the Aliceville property was photographed by a Pickens County Sheriff's deputy at 6:48 a.m. on July 2nd, after the ambulances had gone and the evidence collection team had moved inside. The photograph shows a gravel drive, a rusted gate standing open for the first time in months, and a for sale sign at the road that no one had ever called about. The property is now a federal crime scene. The for sale sign is still there. The man in custody entered a not guilty plea at his initial appearance. He has retained private legal representation. His attorney declined to comment for the public record. Farida Osei, the bureau analyst whose link analysis work connected 3 missing persons cases to a single burner phone and a single property, returned to the Birmingham field office on the morning of July 3rd. She had an open caseload of 9 other preliminary inquiries. She opened the first one at 8:17 a.m. The network, as the indictment defines it, is partially dismantled. The man at its center is in custody. The 14 people he held are in care, and one of them has a fiancée who received a phone call at 5:47 in the morning and asked if he could come. But the Hattiesburg number belongs to someone. That someone has not been identified. The possible second location, the one referenced in the text exchange, the one investigators believed was in Mississippi, has not been found. Dana Pruitt drove home the long way. She stopped for a pink flip-flop in a ditch. What she set in motion is still in motion. Some of it has been recovered. Some of it is